Sure. Okay. So it has been a while since our last interview for this channel. We hope to now get back to more regular interviews and video posting. Since our last interview, our friend and colleague Charles Morris passed away suddenly this past January. You can see him in our last interview posted to this channel, the one with Nicholas. I want to also mention that we will hold the 7th International Workshop on Cometary Astronomy in August 2026, 2 days after the total solar eclipse of the sun in Spain. The Madrid Planetarium has generously offered to host the meeting. Several of our YouTube channel team members here are planning to attend. We hope to see many of you there. So I'm Dan Green, and I'm joined today by our usual YouTube channel team members, Carl, Casper, Dennis, and Mike. Today, we are interviewing Alan Hale, an astronomer who is well known for having discovered comet 1995-01, known as Hale-Bopp, which is intrinsically one of the largest and brightest comets of the past millennium. Alan founded the Earthrise Institute, has been one of the most prolific observers of comets, and has minor planet 4151 named after him. Is that right, Alan?
That's correct.
Okay. Today, we hope to learn quite a bit more about Alan and his career. So, welcome, Alan.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you all.
All right, I'll start off the questioning here. Alan, could you please describe your educational background and your work at JPL and in astronomy generally, just to kind of introduce yourself?
Okay. I was raised in Alamogordo, New Mexico. My dad was an Air Force officer. I was actually born in Japan, but he was transferred to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico when I was a couple of months old. And then he retired from the Air Force and worked civil service at Holloman for the next 20 some years. So I went to all my schooling in Alamogordo. Uh, through a long story, which is way too long to discuss here, I ended up attending the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, graduating class of 1980. I was stationed in a couple of duty stations in Southern California during the early to mid 1980s. After getting out of the Navy, I worked at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena for about 2.5 years. I was with the Deep Space Network, worked, among other things, with the Voyager 2 encounter with Uranus. I handled the radio science part of that encounter from the Deep Space Network side. Left JPL in 1986, attended graduate school at New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, earned my PhD in 1992, worked for a while at what is now called the New Mexico Museum of Space History in Alamogordo. Left that position after a while, kind of launched out on my own, founded what, as you correctly now called, the Earthrise Institute a few years later. I did teach online classes for an organization called the American Public University System for about 8 years, from about 2009 to about 2017. And I've been kind of more or less semi-retired ever since that point. I'm still very active, especially since I've gotten so involved with the Las Cumbres Observatory and their Global Sky Partners Educators Forum. I've worked with that and do a lot of work with that, and I enjoy that. And my body no longer lets me do all the visual observing that I did for so long. I still will do it occasionally. In fact, I've been out observing the new nova and lupus a couple of times over the last week. But here I am.
Good. Yeah, the Nova and Lupus has gotten up to magnitude 5.5.
Yeah. Yeah. I had measured 5.2 about night before last. So
Wow.
it's,
Yeah, brightest nova in a while.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. And could you just tell us how you got to Cloudcroft then? Because you were in Alamogordo. So what?
Okay. Okay. For those who aren't familiar with the geography here, the Sacramento Mountains is one of the big mountain ranges of the Southern Rockies, crosses central New Mexico, south central New Mexico. Alamogordo is on the western foothills of the Sacramento Mountains, and Cloudcroft is right on the ridge of the Sacramento Mountains. So even though I was raised in Alamogordo, Cloudcroft was half an hour drive away. We went to Cloudcroft quite a bit. And I decided, even back my high school years, that, gee, I would kind of like to live up here someday. Uh, when the opportunity presented itself a few decades later, I went ahead and we bought property up here. I actually live about a half hour's drive east of Cloudcroft, and I've been out here ever since. The skies are very clear and very dark. There are a lot of astronomical facilities located in and around Cloudcroft. The National Solar Observatory had their big facility at Sacramento Peak for many, many, many years. Apache Point Observatory, part of the Astrophysical Research Consortium, their big 3.5 meter telescope just south of Sac Peak. The Sloan Digital Sky Survey, their telescope is also on that same facility by Apache Point. So, and there's lots of private observatories around here. It's kind of an astronomer's mecca to some extent.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Okay, Carl.
that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Hey, Alan. So your
Hi, Carl.
PhD dissertation was on the formation and detectability of exoplanets. So we were wondering what got you interested in those, especially the transit method, which I think at the time had not actually been successfully used.
Right.
And did you consider doing a dissertation on comets?
Uh, I'll answer that latter question first. No, I never really did. I was known for comet and comet observing, but maybe a part of me wanted to show the world that I was a little bit more than that. There was another part of me. Uh, you got to remember, I came of age during the 1960s, and got interested in astronomy very early. In fact, when I was in first grade, I was very scholastically capable. My teachers wanted to move me up to second grade. My father had had a similar experience, had a bad experience with that, said, no, I'll check out books and get him interested in other things. He checked out some books on astronomy from the library at Holloman and handed them to me. I'm in first grade. I got hooked right away. I mean, my interest vacillated between a lot of different fields. I had my dinosaur fetish for a while, and I was interested in birds, but I always came back to astronomy. Um, my first major astronomical observation came when I was 8 years old. My dad was an early riser. You always rise about, you get up around 4:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock, 4:30. And he was up one morning. He noticed something happening outside, came and woke me up, and we stared out our living room window towards the east until dawn. This was the 1966 Leonid meteor storm. So I mean, thanks to him, I got to see that. I was constantly, Dad, I want a telescope. 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 You see where this is going. So to shut me up, he finally did get me a telescope when I was 11. But the 1960s, this was during the Apollo era, rush to the moon. I kind of got caught up in that. And then there was a certain television program I'm sure most of you have heard of. It's called Star Trek. And yeah, you all have heard it, I'm sure. And the whole concept of exploring strange new worlds, and I got that. I've always been fascinated by the whole concept. Is there life out there? Are we alone? All those philosophical questions. And I decided to see if I could maybe make some kind of contribution toward that. So when I went to graduate school, I wanted to see what kinds of projects I could do to facilitate that. At that point, there were no known exoplanets. So I had to look at related topics and topics that are related. So solar type binary systems and solar type stars was kind of my connection to that. As far as the photometric method or the transit method was concerned, I admit I when I first encountered that, I kind of dismissed that and think, not really, not really. But one of my mentors, unofficial mentor for my project, was Lawrence Doyle from who at that time was at the SETI Institute at NASA Ames. In fact, I met him at a DPS meeting in Austin, and he had given a presentation. And during the Q&A, someone asked a question, which planted the whole idea for my eventual PhD thesis in my mind. I introduced myself to Lawrence, and then he and I stayed as colleagues for many, many years thereafter. Lawrence encouraged me to examine the photometric method in more detail, and I did. We ended up co-authoring a paper on that we presented at a conference, and that was published in the mid-1990s. Lawrence especially was interested in eclipsing binaries as possible places to look for planets by that method, because you already know that the system is already more or less edge onto us. My career kind of went off into a different direction, thanks to several issues, among them a certain comet. But Lawrence stayed with that. He was part of the Kepler team, and if you remember all the big publicity news about Kepler 16, the first Tatooine planet, i.e., the planet orbiting a circumbinary system, Lawrence was the lead investigator on that discovery team. So when that discovery came out, I mean, I was just thrilled because this was my old colleague, my old mentor, becoming making a name for herself, and he's been on several other teams since that point. But that was kind of the thrill. So Lawrence was vindicated. I'm glad he stayed with it, and that's kind of what led me. I think Kepler has definitely proven that the transit method works for detecting planets. I think there are two profound things that Kepler really taught us. One is that planetary systems are indeed very common throughout the galaxy. We kind of felt that anyway, but it was nice to have that vindicated. But the other thing, which I found even more profound, is that our solar system is not a typical planetary system. In fact, there's really no such thing as a typical planetary system when we have large Jovian-sized planets close in, all the hot Jupiters. We've had to learn about effects like planet migration and so on. So it seems to be a very stochastic process. The planets are out there. I'm not sure there's an awful lot of Earths out there, but at least we know the planets are there.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Dennis?
Hi, Alan. Dennis Brzezinski, British Astronomical Association.
Hi, Dennis.
What event or comet or perhaps a person triggered your interest and love for comets? Have you got a cometary mentor like you had a planetary exoplanet mentor?
No, that's kind of there are actually two of us. My best friend when I was in elementary school was a chap named Mark Bakke. Uh, I was interested in astronomy first. I got him interested. He ended up kind of taking the lead. He was the first one to get a telescope of the two of us. He got a small 60 millimeter refractor a few months before I got my 4.5 inch reflector from Sears. I knew it enough to get the largest aperture telescope that was available for a reasonable price. He was the one who discovered the magazine Sky and Telescope. So I started getting Sky and Telescope. As soon as I got my telescope, I wanted to see all the objects that were out there. I mean, I wanted to see the spiral galaxies. I wanted to see the clusters, the diffuse nebulae, and I'd see pictures of comets. I wanted to see a comet. Well, lo and behold, right around the time I got my first telescope, Sky and Telescope mentioned a comet that was going to be in the sky, Comet Tago Sato Kosaka. This was early 1970. So the Sky and Telescope issue pointed that on the night of February 2nd, it would be located next to the bright star Hamel, Alpha Arietis. Well, I knew where that was. So Bart came over to my house that night with his telescope. We had my telescope out, and we found this little fuzzball, faintly visible to the naked eye. Went and I got my whole family to come out and look at it. They were kind of underwhelmed, but Mark and I were just totally thrilled. I made a sketch for it. In fact, I have the sketch that I made at the telescope that night. I can show that. In fact, I may do that here a little bit. I followed Comet Tago Sato Kosaka every night for the next week. And then it was cloudy, and then I didn't look for it again. But by then, Sky and Telescope was talking about this other comet that was in the sky that would be coming, and this was Comet Bennett, which appeared in the morning sky during the latter part of March, and that was a truly spectacular object. Any of you who've been around long enough remembers Comet Bennett. It was a beautiful, beautiful, bright, great comet, one of the 20th century's best comets. So that one probably got me hooked more than anything else. The fact I had two bright comets, one of them being this great one, within the first couple of months after I really started actively observing. And then Sky and Telescope pointed out a couple of more naked eye comets which appeared that same interval that were both gone before had a chance to really see them. There was another dim naked eye comet that fall, Comet Abbe, and I thought, wow, bright comets are cool. They come by all the time. Well, no, they don't. But by that time, I was irreparably hooked. So I kind of made it my, for lack of a better word, obsession to try to observe every comet that came along that I was capable of detecting. So that did it.
And how many of the rest of us have similar stories?
Very similar.
Yeah.
Eerily similar.
Mike?
Yeah. Hi, Alan. Mike
Hi,
here.
Mike.
Yeah, Alan, maybe I'm interested. Can you describe your early years of comet observing and maybe leading up to the discovery of your comet? Yeah, and where were your observing places where you
Yeah.
observed?
Well, of course, for the first several years, I observed from Alamogordo. Most of my observations coming from either my backyard or my front yard, and we lived on the outskirts of town, so the stars were right there. And Alamogordo's not that big of a city. When I was in high school, I was able to get usage of the school. The local school district had an observatory at one of the elementary schools in town, and thanks to a local amateur astronomer named Phil Simpson, who was an officer stationed out at Holloman, and whom I stayed friends with from that point ever after, I was able to get access to the Alamogordo Public Schools telescope that was a 32 centimeter telescope. So I started using that. As soon as I got to the Naval Academy, they had a 41 centimeter telescope there on top of the physics building. I mean, the light pollution wasn't all, it was kind of meh. So, but I was able to observe from there. But then when I graduated, I bought a 20 centimeter telescope for me as a graduation present to myself. And then it was stationed in Southern California and was constantly driving up into the mountains all the time to collect observations. And then after I got out of the Navy and started working at JPL, and that's right at the same time that Charles Morris started working there. So we were driving up into the mountains north of LA or northwest of LA during those next 2.5 years. A lot of times Charles and I observed jointly. Sometimes it was just me, but and then after I left California, came back to New Mexico, observed from my backyard in Las Cruces. We bought some property kind of to the northwest of Las Cruces itself with reasonably dark skies. And then after I finished graduate school, we lived in El Paso for a little while, a long story there. And I was back driving up into the desert between El Paso and Alamogordo for quite a while. And then after my ex-wife and I bought the property here in Cloudcroft, of course, I observed from here. And we'd only lived up here for 4 months when I happened to come across that certain comet. And that's where, I mean, most of my astronomical observations for the last 30 years have been from here, except when I've been traveling or something like that. I mean, I've kind of almost made a point of interest, all the various countries and states, U.S. states and different countries I've observed from. So
you found your comet from your backyard there?
actually from my driveway, because we had a kind of this big concrete slab in front of our driveway, in front of our garage at the house there in Cloudcroft. And I kept the telescope in the garage and would just wheel it out to observe. And that's where I found it from.
Can I ask you, Alan, during all those years of comet observing visually, where did you report your observations to?
Starting in high school, I started sending my observations to the IEU circulars, and my first one was published was a visual observation of Comet West, and from that, so I reported them to the IU circulars and to Sky and Telescope. I would send observations to Sky and Telescope, so I saw my observations published in those two places that's for the most time.
Okay, Casper.
In fact, I made I just add a little bit. the first observation that was ever published in IU Circulars was one of Comet West on my 18th birthday. And in the letter that I sent to Brian, I happened to mention it was my 18th birthday, and I wonder if he just smiled upon me and said, well, we'll give him this birthday present. So,
Yeah. Alan, I was wondering if you ever, like whenever you were interested in astronomy and comets in particular, if you ever had the dream of actually discovering a comet, and if you did any dedicated comet hunting, if so, did you have like any like misses, like did you like miss a comet because it was too late? Could you tell us something about that?
well, I mean, yes, I had this fantasy all along, I mean, for even early, of discovering a comet someday, and I did some hunting kind of haphazardly off and on, even when I was in high school, and likewise when I was in Southern California, but I couldn't maintain anything systematic, especially when I've got to drive up into the mountains to do all that. Now I know people like Don Mockholtz did that, but it was just too much for me. And then after I went into graduate school and lived in Las Cruces, and I could observe from the home environment. And I say I did observe from my backyard from there in Las Cruces. I did do some systematic comet hunting. In fact, I ended up logging about 400 hours of unsuccessful comet hunting while I was there living in Las Cruces. I had one near miss. There's a bit of a story here. Way I would normally do this, and this was with the big 41 centimeter scope that I had. I would start around a couple of days after third quarter in the morning sky, and then just sweep back and forth very gradually, and over the next couple of weeks, eventually cover the ground back down to the horizon. Well, it so happened that New Year's Day, 1989, was the beginning of that particular window when I would have started. Now, there was an amateur astronomer in Japan, Tetsuo Yanaka, who discovered a comet in gibbous moonlight in late 1988, 1988R. So I was actually up observing that comet on New Year's Eve, but then planned to start my regular program the following morning. And of course, being New Year's Eve, I stayed up that night to watch the new year come in. I went to bed shortly after midnight. It was completely clear. And I got up at 3 a.m. to begin my comet hunting, and it was overcast. And oh well, okay. It was one of these very frustrating systems. This slow-moving weather system that stood over us for 4 days. I had solid overcast for 4 days. Somewhere in the middle of that, we got like a 10-minute sprinkle. And it was on New Year's Day that I got an email from you, Dan, saying that Mr. Yanaka had discovered another comet. Could you please confirm it? And I looked at the position that you sent me, and it was precisely in the area that I would have been hunting. And I was hoping, oh, please don't be real, don't be real, don't be real. And of course it was. So that was 1989A. I am convinced it would have been Comet Hale-Yanaka if the weather had off for a few more hours. I mean, I had to, like I say, I finally did see it once the clouds had finally cleared out. And then a few days later, in my hunting, I did come across it. But by then it's too late. So that was my one near miss story. I see, when I got to 400 hours, I said, well, I've got 2 kids now. I've got a career I've got to work on. I can't do this anymore. So I pretty much stopped the systematic hunting in 1992. And then, of course, 3 years later, I stumbled across one when I wasn't even looking for one. So
Right.
I have no idea whether there's a lesson there or not, but that's the way it went.
Well, the one you got is pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, 1989A was a rather dim, dinky, unimpressive comet. It was already 2 months past perihelion. It was gone in a month. I would have taken it. I would have taken it.
Yeah.
But
I observed that comet and did some astrometry on that 1989A. So yeah, I remember that comet.
Yeah. Well, let's say it would have had a slightly different name. I wouldn't mind sharing it. I mean, all credit to Mr. Yanaka, and I wouldn't mind sharing it at all. But I just wish that clouds would have held off for about another 3 hours, but oh well.
So, Alan, the number of your visually observed comets is pretty impressive. I don't know what your current count is. Do you have that?
It's 762.
Whoa.
And that includes that's 5. I count separate apparitions of the same comet, periodic comets as separate comets.
Yeah.
That's 535 separate comets.
Wow. Are there any particular comets that you missed seeing in the last half century and regret not having seen?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, this one may seem a little bit strange, but Giacobini's Zinner returned in 1972. I knew it was historically, I knew that was a very important comet. And I knew it was returning that year. Sky and Telescope had mentioned it. But at this time, my sole knowledge of comets and where to look for them was in Sky and Telescope. Sky and Tel never published an ephemeris for that comet. And then they mentioned it was there. And then a few months later, someone mentioned observing it visually, 10th magnitude. But since they never published an ephemeris, I never had a chance to look for it. And it was that incident, by the way, which said there's got to be some way to learn about comets other than through this monthly publication that may or may not tell me where a comet is. That's what led me to eventually to the IU circulars. So I mentioned that there were a couple of comets very early on that were visible to naked eye, but were very quick. Daido Fujikawa in early 1970 was one. I wish I could have seen that one. One very recent one that it's questionable whether or not I would have seen it, but I never had a chance to look for it, was the recent Kreutz Sungrazer 2024 S1. That one, I think some of you may know this, but last September, I got struck by a bacterial lung infection. I was in the hospital for over 3 weeks, 2 of those weeks in intensive care with a tube stuck in my back trying to drain out fluid. My lung was almost collapsed because of all the excess fluid. And then after I got out of intensive care, I was still in regular care for another week. And then I got sent to a rehab facility in Las Cruces for another week and a half after that. It was right during that time I was in intensive care that 2024 S1 was discovered, and it appeared. Whether or not, I mean, the brightness of that comet was very erratic. It brightened and faded, brightened again, and all that. Its location, it was accessible from my location here. I don't have a very good horizon in that direction. I would probably have had to travel a little bit to get it above the trees from here. I don't know if I would have seen it or not, but I never had the chance to try. And I think that's what really bothered me. But I never even got to look, because that was such an interesting, important comet. Of course, as we all know, it didn't survive its perihelion, so we never got to see it afterwards. But not to be undaunted, I did order up some images of it from Las Cruces Observatory. When I was in my hospital bed in intensive care, I actually got a couple of sets of images from it. They're right there in my hospital bed. So,
well, we're glad that your health has improved.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah. We're fortunate to be able to interview you today. Carl?
Yeah, so kind of keeping along the lines of Dan's previous question. So according to your website, you've observed over 150 periodic comets, which is like 30% of all the numbered periodic comets out there. And about 88 of those comets you observed at more than one apparition. So are there any periodic comets that you really look forward to seeing as they come back, or one that you're really looking forward to seeing that you've only seen once?
I don't know if there's anything that's really strong on that list. I mean, I don't really do much visual observing anymore. If you've probably seen my website, I've, quote, retired, unquote, from visual observing. That doesn't mean that if there's not something bright or interesting that's out there that I won't drag the scope out to see it. In fact, Casper, your comet that's coming in, if it behaves itself, I'll probably drag my scope out to look at yours. I've been imaging it on a fairly regular basis, by the way. In fact, I may show one later. Shamas has a good return early next year. Don Machholz's comet 96P Machholz 1 has a very good return in 2028. Might drag out and look at that. David Levy's comet, he discovered a Halley-type comet in 1991, and that one returns in 2042. If I'm still in any way capable of observing comets in that late date, yeah. And then, of course, there's Halley in 2061. Now, I'll only be 103 then, so in all honesty, I don't. While I might fantasize about hanging around that long, more than likely that won't happen. Comet Mellish from 1917 will also be returning right around that same time. And then, of course, Mike, if you and Gary Kronk are correct that the comet of 1744 is identical to some of those earlier historical comets, and it does return in 2097, I'd only be 139 then. I would love to see that comet. I hope you're right. I really hope you're right. I think you make a pretty good case, and I honestly hope you're right. But when I think that even my youngest grandchild will be older then than I am now,
I think we'd all love to see that comet.
Yeah. One of the comet that I'm hopeful of seeing, Zdenek Sekanina wrote a paper and put it on archive earlier this year. He's predicting that we'll have another bright population 2 Kreutz sun grazer appearing maybe 2027 or shortly thereafter. I hope he's right. I would love to see one of those comets. I did see Terry Lovejoy's comet, 2011 W3, but only after it came back north. There was nothing left of it. It was literally nothing more than a brightening of the sky background that had about the same surface brightness as the Gegenschein. And I followed it for about 2 hours on 2 consecutive nights, and I watched this brightening of the sky background travel against the stars in the expected motion, expected rate, expected direction, for 2 hours on 2 consecutive nights. So yeah, I got it, but not quite what the Southern Hemisphere folks got. So
was Kiyosaki just a little bit early for you then?
Yes, it was. Although I'm kind of surprised because I was in 2nd grade then, and that was when I was going through my dinosaur fetish. But I'd already had expressed an interest in astronomy, and my dad, the early riser again, I'm surprised he didn't see it at some point, or at least was aware of it. But no, I never saw that one. So yeah, say I would have been 1965. I would have been 7 years old. And there was the bright sun grazer in 1970, white Ortiz Spilelli, but that was only strictly from the Southern Hemisphere. I did actually. Side note, on my trip to Australia in 2012 to see the solar eclipse, I was attending a kind of a astronomers conference, and I met Graham White. And I actually got the chance to meet him, but no, I couldn't tell him that I saw his comet, unfortunately. So,
wasn't that last comet you mentioned discovered with the naked eye by a Boeing 707 pilot?
Yes.
That's amazing.
Mr. Ortiz was flying a plane when he found that one. So yes.
And I know there's another comet that was also discovered visually by a pilot, also from a 707.
Yeah, I think that was Comet Wilson Hubbard in '61. And I got a chance to meet Stuart Wilson, by the way, at a Texas meeting of the Texas Star Party once. So that was. Yeah, so comets have been discovered from planes. Probably not anymore because people like you are finding them so much earlier. But
sorry.
Okay, Mike.
Alan, you already mentioned it. The Las Cumbres Observatory. So you started already when you were still visually observing, but now you say you do it even more. So how did you start with it? How did you come to it? And how do you select the comets you plan to observe? Is it some do you have a scheme how to do it?
Well, I guess my association started back around 2014, I think, about. I knew a couple of educators based out of Fort Davis, Texas, which is where McDonald Observatory is, and there was a big 75th anniversary celebration of McDonald These educators invited me out there for that. And so I got kind of a tour around McDonald. And the, at that time, education director for Las Cumbres showed me where their telescopes are and said, would be love to have you part of us at some point. So he handed me his card and we had a nice chat. I didn't really act on that for a while. I was going through some crazy emotional stuff of my own at the time. But when I finally worked through that, I decided I wanted to follow up on this. So I called that person. He was no longer in that position, but a gentleman named Edward Gomez was. So I contacted Edward. Said, "Oh, love to have you." So he added me on as part of the Global Sky Partners, which is it's a global network of astronomy educators all over the world doing some absolutely incredible stuff. We have monthly Zoom calls, and usually one or two of the educators will give a presentation on what they do. Just truly amazing stuff. Our call last month, we had one presentation from a gentleman in Africa and another one from I can't even remember now. I think it was India. But anyway, and I offer my expertise on comets and near-Earth asteroids to all the educators who are part of GSB. In exchange, I use Edward lets me use their telescopes for comet observations, and I've been doing that now for several years. I started doing astrometry on them starting around 2011 or thereabouts. As far as for which ones I pick, I pick the ones that I consider interesting, and that's kind of a nebulous definition. I especially look at comets that are on the NEOCP or PCCP to see if anything look bright, like they might become bright or come close or come interesting. So I've done quite a few of those. Objects in cometary orbits, even if they're not, quote, comets, unquote, I may image them to see if I find cometary activity. I've been successful in a couple of those. I've started seeing if I can make a recovery attempts for a few. My first successful recovery was 15P Finlay in 2011. I got it on two images from two different sites, one day before anyone else did. So even though I know these aren't normally recorded anymore, I consider myself, hey, I got that recovery. Of course, the one that I'm very glad of was getting 13P Olbers, which I got in August of 2024 or 2023. And I've had a couple of others since then. Most recently, as far as I haven't seen any other observations, but the MPC hasn't published anything recently, 351P Weigert Pan stars. I got images on that from two different LCO telescopes back in late May. So as far as I know, I have the recovery on that one. But it's just, again, whatever I find that looks, quote, interesting, unquote. And Casper, your comet is certainly interesting. So I've definitely been keeping an eye on yours.
So you're not retired then, Alan?
I'll probably completely retire when they do with my body whatever it is they're going to do. Well, whenever that time comes.
So how many nights are you observing in a typical month, Alan?
Nowadays, very, very few. Like I say, I pretty much retired from that visual activity.
No. I mean the imaging. How many nights? How many nights a month?
Probably 3 or 4. I don't do it all that much.
Okay.
It's not my system. I mean, Las Cumbres Observatory owns that system. I'm a guest, and I don't want to, quote, overstay my welcome, unquote. So I know the program I'm under is for the Global Sky Partners educators. It's basically their program, and I don't want to take away time from them when they're using the network for their projects. So I will go on as long as I'm not taking time away from them.
Okay. So you told us a little bit earlier about some of the people who were important in your life. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about Charles? I really, really wish we had done this interview before Charles passed away, because he would have been a good questioner of you. You guys go back a long ways.
Oh yes, oh yes. Charles and I had actually been communicating with each other for perhaps a year or two before he moved out to California. And then we met in person. There was a workshop on cometary astronomy held at JPL in October of 1983, if I remember the date correctly. In fact, John Bortle came to that as well. We were going to actually have a practice session in the mountains, but the weather didn't cooperate, so we had had a practice session with some photographs indoor at the auditorium. So that was the first time I met Charles, but he was really impressed with the area. And I remember Steve Edberg at JPL was the one that had put that conference together. And I remember Charles and Stephen telling Steve and I that he really was looking forward to moving out here. So he applied for the job at JPL, started working there a month after I started working there. So we started almost right away doing joint observing sessions in the mountains together. He taught me a lot. I mean, when it really comes to doing brightness measurements and all the other types of measurements that go with visual comet observing, he taught me a lot of what I know, and I owe a lot of what I did and have accomplished to him. I do not hesitate to give him credit for that.
I remember observing with both of you once when I went out. I was observing at Palomar about 19. Oh, when would that have been? Around 84, 85?
It would have been right by then, because that's when we were there. Yes.
Yeah. And we went up into the mountains. Was it Whitaker Peak or someplace?
Yep. That was probably the place.
I think we met up there. Yeah. And the three of us were observing. I don't remember what comets we saw that night, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a site I discovered, by the way. I would often just drive around trying to find other sites to use, and I think I was the one that actually found that site, and it turned out to be a very good site. It was easy to get to. The only problem was it was very windy a lot of the time, but you take what you can get. But so yeah,
very exposed up there.
Yeah, and once I moved to New Mexico, the joint observing sessions didn't happen. He did come out to New Mexico for the annular solar eclipse in May '94. That was right at the time when I was living in El Paso. And the path of that annular eclipse passed right over us, over El Paso. In fact, we lived within a mile of the center line. And there was a new comet had just been discovered, Comet Takamizawa, 1994 I think. So we went out to the desert north of El Paso that night to go observe. So we observed that and a couple other comets. So that was our last formal observing session together. My older son was in first grade at an elementary school in northeast El Paso, and we were practically almost dead on center line. So we set up telescopes there in the patio in front of the school for all the teachers and the students to watch. So that was the last time Charles and I observed together. Last time I saw Charles was at their Riverside Telescope Makers gathering in California on its penultimate meeting. That was in 2018. So that was there. We had all the various. There's a famous picture again, which I can show. They got all the comet discoverers there, which included yours truly, David Levy, Gene Mueller, and Don Mockholt. In fact, that was the last time I saw Don alive. He told me then that he was still hunting comets. And of course, with all the surveys, I didn't really think he'd be successful again. I said, well, good luck. But I honestly didn't expect him. Of course, a few months later, he found one. He found that last one. I was ecstatic when he found that. But of course, he passed away a couple of years later, and he'll never find another one, unfortunately.
He was still searching for comets when I visited him.
Yeah.
He was, like woke up at 3 a.m. And yeah. He was like, "Hey, left the bathroom light on." Like I was like, "Oh yeah. So turn it off."
Yeah.
I'm sure he has. Well, I'm fairly certain he has the most comet hunting hours visually of anybody in history.
I'm sure. I think you're quite correct on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last time I actually saw Charles, is it, as I mentioned earlier, I had my wedding in a year ago was on Zoom, and Charles attended by Zoom. So he came on. Of course, this was before the wedding, so we're talking comets and stuff before my wedding.
Yeah.
And I will have to say, I mean, we had the wedding right here at our residence here in Cloudcroft, but that night I had to go out and mark the occasion. Olbers was still pretty bright, so I went out and observed Comet Olbers that night. So
That's good. That's good. Casper?
Yes, so we know that you have observed with Charles Morris while in California, as you said, but have you usually observed alone? And if so, why? Because I know at least some of us here like to observe alone, to have that, I don't want to say like more intimate relationship with the sky, but there is something to be said about being just by yourself with your telescope.
Hmm.
So yeah, do you usually observe alone?
yes, I usually do. For the same reason that you just echoed. I feel pretty much the same way. It's kind of, I guess, my personal connection, my own personal feeling is just something to do alone. Now, if somebody wants to join me, that's one thing. Say Charles and I observed quite a bit together. My friend Mark Bakke that I talked about very early on, when we observed together quite a bit way back in those days. Uh, Vicky, my wife, joined me on a handful of occasions, mainly early on. In fact, my first observation of Don Machholz's last comet, this was before Vicky had moved in with me, but she was here visiting, and she got up with me at 4 o'clock in the morning to go out and look at Don's comet. And she does most of the driving. And so if I want to go somewhere, she actually ends up driving me to any observing site. But since unfortunately I don't have to do that much anymore, so she's kind of relieved about that. I mean, when it's been 5 years now. Comet Neowise was around when it was first visible in the morning. I do not have a good horizon at all in that direction. And this was in the northeast before dawn, right before dawn, during dawn, in fact. And I had to drive to about an hour east of here to have a site with a flat horizon in that direction. And she actually came with me on a couple of mornings and observed the comet with me. In fact, she got a nice picture of the comet with her phone that she posted on. I mean, I have my DSLR. It took some what I like to think are nice pictures, but she took one of her phone and posted that and actually got good compliments on it. So that's but again, most of that's I still do it alone. Last one I really observed with any people around. As I mentioned, I was hospitalized last September, right during the period of time when Comet Tsuchinshan Atlas was in the morning sky. I missed the entire morning apparition of that comet because I was in my hospital bed. But by the time it was appearing in the evening sky, towards the middle of October, that was when I was at the rehab facility in Las Cruces. And the people at the rehab facility were very good about it. I had made my request. I want to be out in the parking lot during dusk so I can see this comet. So they wheeled me out in my wheelchair so I could see the comet, take pictures of it. And kind of in gratitude for what they did, I made arrangements with the Astronomical Society in Las Cruces, which, by the way, was founded by Clyde Tombaugh, discovered Pluto, whom I got to know quite well when I was at graduate school. But anyway, so we had several members of the Astronomical Society from Las Cruces come by and set up telescopes in the parking lot at the rehab facility, along with several of the employees and guests and members of the facility to go out and show the comet. In fact, my background picture that you see there was taken by a friend of mine who happens to be one of our state senators in New Mexico, but he lives in Las Cruces and represents a district in Las Cruces. He took that photo of me and some of the society members, some of the employees and residents of the facility, and of course you could see the comet as well. So,
Okay. Dennis?
Great tale. Alan, you've obviously been visually observing over a very long period of time to collect all those observations that are credited to you. I wonder what major factors have improved over that long period, perhaps instrumentation, communications, communications and information, and the sky conditions have changed considerably. So how do you see things changing over your period of visual observing of comets?
well, of course, part of that's just been my own professional development. I mean, when I first started, I was 11 years old.
Mm.
I had that 4.5-inch telescope from Sears. My only source of information was Sky and Telescope, this publication that comes out once a month, which may or may not include the information that I would want to observe comets. And I've already told the story about how one of their omissions led me to the IEU circulars a few years later. But of course, by the time I graduated high school, I was using the 12.5-inch telescope that the school district had, and then the big scope, and then of course having my own scopes in California. Of course, IU circulars were still by snail mail. This was before the internet age. Charles was quite a source of information because of his connections to people like you, Dan. So we knew about something right away, and he would know it, and then Charles would pass it on to me. Then once I moved out here to New Mexico, then that's when the internet age started, and I was taking the IU circulars by the dial-up service, and then the circulars started being sent by email. So that, and then I acquired the 16-inch to 41-centimeter telescope in 1987, which has been my main instrument since that time. Of course, during that whole time, my skills as an observer have been increasing as I became more and more and more experienced at doing all this. And of course, nowadays, we have the NEOCP, the PCCP, that we have objects that are being available for attempted observations even before they're announced. Dan still occasionally sends me emails that can you check this object out, and so on. I see, in addition, of course, to the visual stuff, I now have access to LCO and their instruments. So my knowledge is pretty instantaneous if there's something out there that is worth attempting and I have the ability to attempt. I generally know about it right away. My skill level is such that if it's possible for me to observe it, I'm usually able to, weather permitting, body permitting, and so on.
So do you
as
have
far as
do you have kind of like instant access to the imaging telescopes that you use if you need it or want it? You just say, "Hey, can I take some images tonight?"
what I usually do is I can submit a request for images. It may not be right away. It depends on what telescopes are available, what sites are available, of course, what weather is at those sites. Usually with the smaller telescopes, i.e. the 35-centimeter scopes, I can usually get something back within a couple of hours if it's necessary. Again, weather permitting, and almost always within a day. If I need something with a larger telescope, like a 1-meter telescope, which I use for the Olbers recovery, that's a little more iffy. The time is a bit more competitive for those instruments. So I may have time scheduled and will get bumped. I've accept that as just part of the process. So I usually restrict most of my requests to the smaller telescopes, and I will generally get the time I need within pretty short order, but they have an automatic scheduler. So that's basically how that works. In terms of skies, personally, where I'm at, I mean, the skies here have always been very good for the most part. I haven't noticed any significant degradation over the period of time I've been here. We obviously have periods. I mean, right now, there are some forest fires that are burning here in New Mexico. There's a major fire that's in southwestern New Mexico in the Gila. And since the winds blow from that direction, for the most part, we get that smoke here. And then there's a fire that's burning actually here in the Sacramento Mountains, but to our northwest. But the winds for a while were blowing towards the southeast, and we were getting that smoke together with the smoke from the Gila fire. So a couple of nights ago. So it was kind of bizarre. As far as clouds were concerned, it was completely clear, but the sky was almost overcast from the smoke. So that that comes with the territory. Of course, now we're supposed to have all this monsoonal moisture come in starting tomorrow. That might help clean the air as far as smoke is concerned, but of course you can't observe when it's cloudy and raining. So that's it. On the other hand, the skies are really, really dark. Someone was visiting from Europe and asked me if can you see the zodiacal light from here? And I said it gets in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was one time I went out, I was looking up and I said, oh, there's some clouds moving in. Oh no. Oh, that's the Gegenschein.
Nice to be in a dark area like that.
Yeah. Yeah. My test for is the sky dark and really dark is can I see M33 naked eye? Not M31, but M33. So
yeah. Carl?
Yeah, so you've used a lot of different telescopes over your career visually, and I think you're best known for using your 16-inch. Is there any particular kind of telescope, refractor, reflector, binocular, whatever, that you prefer using? And if you had a dream visual telescope, what it would be for comet observing?
I think that 41 centimeter scope would probably be that instrument.
Yeah.
I had always wanted a telescope like that when I was living in California. One of my best friends from that area is Bob Lunsford, who is with the American Meteor Society. He had a telescope like that. In fact, he had a DS-16 like that, and we would meet for observing occasionally. I remember one night I was looking at a comet. I had my 8-inch out. I was looking at the comet, and I thought it was pretty impressive. Then I saw it in his scope, and I said, I wanted to come back and kick mine because it didn't show it as well as his did. The problem with the telescope that size is transporting. I mean, that's big. I mean, the 8-inch was an easy telescope to transport. That big DS-16 is not. That is, you got to take it apart and dismantle it and reassemble it, and it's heavy, it's bulky. But once I moved to Las Cruces and was in a place where I could observe there from my backyard, so to speak, I said I really wanted a telescope like that. And then I was attending a Riverside telescope makers conference. I was walking along and I saw one of those telescopes, and there was a sign that said for sale. It was $1,150. Well, the factory price, asking price, was something like $3,000. And I say, I will never see a price again like this on this side of eternity. So I stood there by that telescope until the owner came by. A gentleman named Dana Patrick. Some of you may know that name. He's discovered some supernovae.
Supernova, yeah.
Yeah. I bought it from Dana right on the spot. I said, I'll figure out how to get this home somehow. And I did. That's when I told my then wife, I don't know if she was all that thrilled about me spending that kind of money, that I'll never, I want a scope like this and I'll never see a price like this again. So that has been my scope. That was in 1987. Since, and then during that period of time that we lived in El Paso, when I did have to take that out into the desert, I would do that maybe once a month because it really is. It's a real beast to disassemble, transport it, reassemble it, disassemble it, put it back in the car, and all that. So here I have a little building here on my property. Here it stays inside. I wheel it out when I want to use it, and that's where it's used. There was a period of time for a while before my body really started acting up too much. When, given the right circumstances, I might transport it somewhere. Those days are gone. I do have a couple of smaller telescopes that I can use for transportation purposes. But that's still by far my preferred instrument for visual observing.
Yeah. For comet hunting, of course, there was traditionally visually the scope to use was the smallest wide angle fast kind of refractor typically, right? And it was I think it was Rolf Meyer in Ontario who really kind of changed things up in the 1980s by, I think he had a 42 centimeter maybe reflector.
Yeah, it was about that size, yes.
And he started hunting for comets and he found comets and has I don't know, 2 or 3 comets named after him. And that was, I remember that being really remarkable to us, that he was actually hunting with that.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, you need to go back a little bit further than that, because if you go back to William Denning at the turn of the century, the 20th century, he was hunting with a 10-inch f8 with reflector, and he discovered his comets. So, nothing's new, is it?
Yeah. But that wasn't traditional. That wasn't the traditional way to go.
Yeah, Rolf Meyer defied the conventional wisdom at that time. I remember that. And of course, David Levy did a lot of his hunting.
Right, and David and Rolf knew each other, and so there may have been a big influence on David from Rolf that way. I'm not quite sure when David started his hunting, but probably not till they got out to Arizona.
Yeah, and you have the Japanese, team that kept using the the Fujinon 25 by 100 binoculars, which is my dream instrument.
Yeah,
they were so good at that.
Yeah. Carl.
Well, these are Vixens, but in the back here. But
yeah.
30 by 125s, which I bought for comet hunting, though I never discovered a comet with them.
Yeah.
One day I'll buy one of those Fujinons.
Yeah. You found a few of your own other ways, though.
Yeah, I had to cheat, though, and use photography and CCDs.
Yeah. But I did see a couple of yours, including your periodic one. So
yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah.
No longer with us, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, oh well, so it goes.
Yep.
Okay. Well, half of us here have comets named for them. I'm jealous. All right, Mike.
If Mike's comet comes back in 2097, then the one he and Gary Kronk say might come back then. Would it possibly be named for him then? I mean, they're the ones that did all the legwork on this.
If the people on the comet naming committee has feels favorably about that, it may happen.
Well, there might be an easier one. I have this one I discovered, I guess, 2010 in NEAT data, but unfortunately, because it's a survey, it's still called NEAT or NEAT, and not after me. But yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate. So
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but Alan, you mentioned your Hale-Bopp discovery was accidental. So of course, if you don't observe, you don't find anything, of course. But also, if you observe a lot, things happen, or things can happen. I think everybody who observes has experienced some strange things outside in the field or somewhere. Do you have some interesting stories to share? One story which was very special to you?
There's I guess you could say a couple. One you might even remember. This was just a few years ago. I was out observing one morning. Suddenly, I saw this bright point of light in the eastern sky, which grew and grew and grew and grew bright. It was diffuse. It did move very slowly, but it moved over the course of half an hour or so that I watched it. And I actually put out a note on Comets ML to see, anybody know what this thing is? Turns out it was a Japanese communication satellite that had been launched and had done a major fuel dump right in the northwestern Atlantic Ocean. And just, I had to be right in the right spot that saw that, but that was pretty dramatic. To tell probably one of my favorite stories, I had to go back to my high school days. One late summer evening, I was lying in our front yard, just looking up the sky. I had a radio there and was listening to some tunes, and Cygnus was passing overhead practically, and I saw the Cygnus didn't look right. It seemed like there was a star there that I never recalled seeing before. It demonstrably altered the pattern of Cygnus that I thought I remembered. And so I don't recall seeing that before. Grabbed a pair of binoculars because it looked like there might have been a tail on it, but no, it was just stars that were nearby that created that appearance. I wonder why I never noticed that before. And I passed it off. It's just something that had always been there and that I had never noticed. Well, the next day there was an article in the newspaper, local newspaper, about the brand new nova in Cygnus. Most of you are probably well ahead of me here. This was Nova Cygni 1975, which is, even now, all these years later, is still the brightest nova that has appeared in my lifetime. Now, if I had followed up on it, I might have reported it. I would not have gotten any real credit for discovery because this was actually a couple of days after it had first appeared. And there are so many hundreds upon hundreds of independent discoverers. I know the IU Circulars did publish the whole big long list of people who reported it there. Sky and Tel did the same thing. I might have gotten into the Sky and Telescope article as one of the cast of hundreds if I had reported it. But I learned my lesson, and that is, if I see something that doesn't look right, follow up on it. Take a few minutes and just follow up on it. To quote one of my favorite, a quote I've seen attributed to one of my favorite science fiction writers, Isaac Asimov, is that the most exciting phrase to hear in science, i.e. the one that heralds new discovery, is not "Eureka, I found it," but "That's funny." So I adopted that attitude ever since that incident with Nova Cygni, and have always checked out everything that looked weird. 99% of the time, it's always been something that's been there that I just, for whatever reason, never noticed. However, 20 years later, that attitude paid off when I was taking a break from my visual comet observations, just checking out some deep sky objects, and looked at M70, saw something nearby, and that's funny. And we all know what happened with that. So to advance the story a few years, I was doing tracking down a comet, and I saw this 6 magnitude star that was not on any star atlases, and the star is clearly there. None of the atlases I showed anything there, and I thought, another nova? Did I just stumble across a nova? So I very quickly, I measured its position and everything. Dan, I sent you an email saying I think I may have discovered a nova at such and such and such a location. And then something kind of nagged at me in the back of my mind. And I went and checked it out. And I very hurriedly sent Dan another email withdrawing. William Herschel had beaten me to it by over 200 years. Everyone's figured out what I'm talking about
Uranus.
now.
Uranus.
Yeah. So
we've had some well-known professional astronomers who have reported Uranus as a possible nova.
Alan, can I ask what your impression was of the appearance of Comet Holmes?
That was very dramatic. I was actually one of the first people to report that, as Dan might remember. I had was getting up early that morning. I was planning on driving down to Las Cruces International Symposium on Personal Commercial Spaceflight. I was involved in a commercial spaceflight effort for a long time, and there was an annual series of conferences that were held in Las Cruces. And I had gotten up at 5 o'clock in the morning, which is very difficult for me, except when I'm observing, and even then it's hard. But anyway, I was going to get ready to drive down to Las Cruces, but before going, I checked my email, and there were some postings on the Comets ML group. Some observers in Spain were reporting that Holmes had apparently undergone a major outburst and was around 7th magnitude. And well, it's still dark here in New Mexico. So I said, well, I'll go check this out, and looked up, and it wasn't 7th magnitude. By that time, it had brightened all the way to 4th. And was naked eye, appeared completely stellar, but it was 4th magnitude. I went ahead, sent that report into Dan, drove down to Las Cruces. I told some of my colleagues there about this, and then came back. That night, it had brightened further to almost 2nd magnitude by then. And then, of course, we all know what happened. with it over the subsequent days and weeks. I think that was just a totally immensely impressive object. I mean, it didn't look like your typical comet, your bright fuzzball. I mean, most people think comet. Of course, we know, those of us who observe comets know better, that a lot of times they appear as fuzzballs, and that's what Holmes looked like. But it was just dramatic watching the evolution of that thing over the weeks and months before it finally dispersed. I actually consider it definitely one of the best periodic comets I've ever seen.
Yeah. So, Alan, you've actually, throughout this interview, you've talked about your comet, but everybody knows about your comet. But why don't you just tell us a little bit about that night and about what actually happened in your experience with that comet and the subsequent sort of fame that came along with that. And
yeah. Well, do you want me to recount the discovery itself, how that happened, or?
Well, just briefly. Yeah, there may be some people who are watching this interview, maybe in 30 years, who would like to hear a little bit more.
All right. Well, this happened in July. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the weather here, July is rainy season here in New Mexico. It's our monsoon season. We don't get a lot of clear nights. I was at that time, there were two things. I was writing a weekly column for our local newspaper, and I was planning to write about Comet Rust, which was going to become a fairly bright binocular comet later in the summer, and I wanted to write about that. Meanwhile, I was part of the organizing committee for a biennial series of conferences called Space and Robotics. It was sponsored by the American Society of Civil Engineers, and we were planning on getting together for Space 96. We'd held an organizing committee meeting in Albuquerque the day before the discovery. And we hit a meeting all day. We retired to a Chinese restaurant that night, socialized and everything. Then I made the 5-hour drive from Albuquerque back to Cloudcroft. And it was raining, thunder, lightning all the way down. But when I got here to my house, it was clear. And I wanted to get an observation of Rust before writing this article. So I very quickly went inside, grabbed the charts, opened the garage door, rolled the scope out, and it was overcast. And waited. And okay, so not tonight. Well, the next day was actually clear. It was on these stretches we get during monsoon season where it's clear for a few days. And so I was definitely planning on observing Rust that night. And it was just an absolutely gorgeous night. I remember rolling the scope out shortly before midnight. One of the little items that I like to include is shortly before heading out, I was listening to a CD from the band REM. And the last song I listened to was Man on the Moon. So as soon as that song was over, I went outside. Comet Clark was in the sky at the time. And I made an observation of Comet Clark, finished up right at just before midnight. But I've got about an hour to wait before Rust rises above the house. So, and it's such a gorgeously clear night that I decided I'd just pass the time by looking at some deep sky objects. And one of them I decided to look for was M70. And I turned the scope to M70, and that's funny. There's something kind of weird nearby, and I followed it for the next 3 hours. I actually did take time to look at Rust, and then I came back, and then I, after checking everything out, I emailed you. I emailed Brian Marsden, saying I think I got a comet. And then after I saw it move, I said definitely a comet. And then after 3 hours, I reported first and last positions. Tried with much difficulty to get some sleep afterwards. I didn't sleep very well for some reason. But I kind of rolled out of bed about 8 o'clock, and there was a congratulatory email from Brian. And then he asked, "Did you ask Thomas Bopp?" And he spelled it Boppe, to confirm it, because he seems to have done so. I said, "Well, I don't know. Don't know any such guy." And then we went out. My sister-in-law was visiting. We went to Cloudcroft for my Sunday brunch and stuff. Did a little hiking, came back, and then there was the email from you, and then the IU circular announced the discovery. Now the comet was 11th magnitude. It was retrograding slowly near the ecliptic. I thought more than likely this is just a periodic comet that probably won't get any brighter. It might return every 6 or 7 years or so, which means I get to see my name every 6 or 7 years, but that's okay. I can live with that. That's cool. And it wasn't until you started emailing me with what the initial orbits were suggesting that indicated that this thing had the potential to be something really, really bright. Now, as you well remember, it took a while before we could get that orbit nailed down. In fact, for a while, it looked like the orbits were going to be much different, much more distant. And then I remember getting the email from Brian says, "Oh, the perihelion distance is coming down again." And then we all knew that we had the potential for a very bright comet a year and a half in the future. But we all know, potential does not necessarily mean reality. So we all had to live with what this thing might potentially. Is it an outburst? Is it fresh from the Oort cloud? All these questions. When Rob McNaught found it on sky survey images or survey images that he'd taken 2.5 years earlier, that resolved the issue of whether or not it's an Oort cloud comet. It wasn't. That was good news. I made it in the news quite a bit early on. Oh, astronomer discovers a comet from his driveway. That was kind of a big thing. I was most impressed with one journalist with the Albuquerque Journal who called me 6 times to make sure he had his facts straight before writing his article. Was on the front page of the Albuquerque Journal. And the fact he was so good, I would call him up if I ever got something interesting happening. I would call him up, and he was very good about following up on stuff. So his name is John Fleck. I really grew to like the guy. I got bitching on Paul Harvey, everything. And then things kind of settled down for a while because this was 95. And of course, the thing wouldn't get bright until another year. It reached naked eye brightness a year later. Then there was the whole business with the Saturn-like object that made all the news. And then there's all the conspiracy theories and all this and all that. And I tried to get out in front of it, but people were more interested in conspiracy theories. And then, of course, when the thing got bright, and I was being called all the time and being called for interviews, it was really quite an experience. I would joke and say, well, y'all should really try this sometime and see what it's like. But the interviews kind of got old for a while. I mean, I got to the point where we disconnected all the ringers, the phones in the house. And I had an answering machine on to record messages from one phone, which was behind a closed door, so we wouldn't hear it. Check it in the morning, I get people calling me all hours of the night, wanting this, wanting that. Radio stations that don't understand the concept of time zones that want me for their early morning show. Of course, I got invited to travel all over, speak a lot of places, got to meet a lot of interesting people. The one I like to talk about is having a private observing session at the Naval Observatory in DC with Vice President Al Gore and his wife Tipper. That was kind of cool. The weather wasn't all that cooperative, but we did get to see the comet, and I complimented the Vice President on the nice telescope he had in his garage, or pardon me, his backyard, pardon me. I felt like it gave me kind of a platform to do some things. I had some visibility that very people have. I tried to call for science literacy. I called for improved employment opportunities for scientists. A couple of years later, when there was the solar eclipse that crossed UK, but also crossed parts of the Middle East, and it occurred to me that I could perhaps do a little bit of, low-level international relations. I took a group of Americans to Iran. We observed the eclipse from there. We got invited to bring a group back to here. Charles joined me for that trip. It was quite an experience. I mean, now, of course, that's all in the past. That was a generation ago. It still gets me into the doors, I guess, if I really want to get into them. But when I was in the hospital last year, most of the people, the nurses and the staff were too young. Maybe the older people had heard of it, but the younger people, they had to go to Wikipedia when I told them who I was, they had to go to Wikipedia to actually read up on it and what it was about. And then, so now my biggest thing is I'm the occasional question on Jeopardy. There was a question about a year or so ago. There's a question, and I've actually got the screenshot that Vicky took about a question about Comet Hale-Bopp on Jeopardy. And the frustrating thing was that none of the contestants got it.
Yeah.
But that's what that was a quarter century ago, over a generation ago. So, new generation now. So
Yeah.
that's life. That's the way it goes.
Yeah. Oh, Casper.
Yes. So, in the mid-90s, we had two great comets, your comet Hale-Bopp and also comet Hyakutake. Was one of them more impressive to you? I mean, of course, you have a bias towards one of them, but they were very different comets. Can you share some of your thoughts about Hyakutake and how it compared to Hale-Bopp?
Well, in a way, you've kind of given part of my answer already. They were two very different objects, and it was almost like the proverbial apples versus oranges comparison. Hale-Bopp had a brighter total magnitude. It had a pretty bright dust tail, high surface brightness dust tail that was fairly long, and also fairly distinct and easily seen ion tail. Of course, it was visible in the sky for much longer. Hyakutake had that incredibly long ion tail. The night I went by the pole, I measured it 70 degrees, by far the longest comet tail I've ever seen. It was high and it was in a dark sky. They were both very, very impressive objects. I know there are quite a few people, I think Charles was one of them, considered Hyakutake the better of the two. I get that. I'm totally okay with that. I mean, at that point, it goes beyond subjectivity. It's almost an emotional thing, almost emotional effect. Casper, you are correct. I did have kind of a personal stake in this. I tried to be objective, and I like to think that I am for the most part. I do kind of consider Hale-Bopp the better of the two, but it's very marginal. It's almost a tie, really, but again, because they were so different. But on the other hand, Comet West in 1976 was definitely better than either of them. So,
one of the things, Alan, that we did, Brian and I were doing when we were working on the orbit of your comet, was to when we kind of got it nailed down, we were really bummed to see that perihelion was on the other side of the sun from us. And we would play with the orbit and change the perihelion to bring it at perihelion very close to the Earth. And it would have been just absolutely astounding if perihelion had occurred on the other side of its orbit, of the Earth's orbit, right? It was like a Halley's Comet thing, right? We were alive to see Halley's Comet in '86 at the worst apparition in about 2,000 years. And the 2061 apparition is going to be one of the best. So we just kind of got through. But Hale-Bopp was still a great comet. And it was, to me, yeah, they're two different kinds of comets, Hyakutake and Hale-Bopp for sure. But that's the interesting thing about comets is you get different types of comets. And Hyakutake would have been nothing if it hadn't passed close to the Earth, right?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it was the passage by Earth that really made it so spectacular. But it came close by Earth, and it truly was a spectacular sight. I mean, that 70-degree tail was truly a sight to behold.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay, so to close, Alan, you had mentioned you have some images. Do you want to just pop up some images real quick and show us and maybe talk a little bit about some of those images you have?
Yeah, let me do that. They're in a PowerPoint, but there's no real order here. let me, can see that slideshow. Play from start. I mentioned that I still have my first drawing of Comet Tago Sato Kosaka from that very first night. There it is. That's through the 4.5-inch telescope, but that's what my very first comet observation ever was in. That is my first comet photograph. That's Comet Bennett.
Mm.
I was standing on the door of our house with a handheld Brownie camera.
Mm.
So that's so there obviously were people around who knew a lot more about comet photography than I did.
That's actually impressive if you know what a Brownie camera does and doesn't do.
That's just a testament to how bright and spectacular that comet was. Yeah, really spectacular. That's Comet West that I took from White Sands Missile Range in 1976, and then my father took this photo of Comet West 2 days later from the same place where I took that photo of Bennett.
Mm.
So really spectacular. We didn't get around to this, but when I was in high school, I did a science fair project on Eros, the asteroid 433 Eros, when it made a close approach to Earth. That was my science fair display. I wanted to make a representation of Eros, so I've got a log that we spray painted black, and it's mounted on top of a pedestal of a bird bath. But I won first place in my division at the state science fair.
Wow.
With that science fair project. And that kind of was my notice to the world that, hey, I'm here and I'm doing this stuff. At one of the science fairs I was at, one of the judges, it wasn't my judge, but he had seen my project, came by and talked to me afterwards. His name was Herb Beebe. He was the chair of the astronomy department at New Mexico State. And that started a lifelong friendship. And of course, when I attended New Mexico State a decade later, he was part of the reason, because my lifetime friendship with Herb. His wife, Rita Beebe, is one of the top experts on planetary atmospheres in the world, was all on the Voyager teams and all that. So, that this little bird bath actually played quite a role in my future life as an astronomer. And I like to show this picture. This was taken while I was in graduate school. I was considerably younger then, of course. This is the conference room. That's Clyde Tombaugh on one side of me, and Jim Christie, the discoverer of Charon, on the other side. Clyde's office was right down the hall from mine. I saw Clyde on almost a daily basis. He came in almost every afternoon, so I got to know Clyde pretty well. And Jim Christie was visiting the area, so he stopped by, and so I had to get this picture taken of us. I mentioned my friend Mark Bakke, who started off with that's me, and that's Mark. We went to see the solar eclipse in 1979. Mark's family lived in North Dakota at the time, so I flew to North Dakota, but we drove north into Manitoba for the eclipse, and this was at the airport in Grand Forks, North Dakota, right before I flew back. So you see, I also look quite a bit younger and slimmer in that particular picture. But and this is, I talked about Nova Cygni, and that's Deneb right here, and that's before. Then I put a little thing for the Nova. This didn't turn out as well as I hoped it would, but anyway, y'all recognize that thing. That's Hale-Bopp. That was from the deck of my house where I was living at the time that I took that picture. And then that's Shakutake, the night it went by the North Pole. That night it had that 70-degree long tail. And I did this for Mike's benefit. This is his comet. I think I will always think of it as his comet from now on. I would really like to hang around long enough to see, but I just don't think so. Maybe they'll perfect suspended animation at some point in the future, and they may be able to revive me for that. That's that object that I was referring to, that fuel dump. That's the Jeopardy question that I mentioned, the one that nobody got.
Yeah.
But I guess I shouldn't feel too bad, because it was like a day or two later. I think this was Celebrity Jeopardy where they did this. There was a question about Jim Lovell, the astronaut, that none of the contestants got. And one of the contestants was an officer in the Marines. And so, well, gee, I guess if they didn't even know who Jim Lovell was, I guess shouldn't feel too bad. But I wanted to I've already plugged Global Sky Partners. I want to say I really like them. This was the last time I saw Tom Bopp alive. That Space Fest conference in Tucson, I think in 2016. That's me in the red shirt here. That's Tom. That's Jim Scotty, and that's David Levy kind of hiding in the background. That's Beatrice Mueller. That's Nick Howes, who put on the conference, and I don't know who the other two people are. But I wanted to show, in case the discussion of Tom ever came up, I wanted to show this picture again.
I'm not sure
I ever saw it in life.
I don't remember seeing a photo of him before. So
Yeah.
that's him in the grayish shirt there.
Yeah, that's him right here. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but
yeah,
that's him.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then that's Tom. As most of you know, he passed away a few years ago. And Tom and I never knew Tom before this. He and I met at a star party in Socorro. We arranged all this first meeting and everything. We did several joint appearances. We got to know each other pretty well. When we did joint appearances, we kind of gravitated. I was kind of the clown, and he was always the straight man. He did a very good straight man. My clown. I do have to tell this one story, if you don't mind. I was on a speaking trip in New York, and my wife wanted to go take the boys to FAO Schwartz, the big toy store in Manhattan. So we were there, and I saw this guy looking. There was one of the employees was kind of doing little tricks with a paper airplane, and this guy was standing looking at him, looked an awful lot like Tom. And my wife said, "Well, go up to him and see if he recognized you." I walked by and he didn't say anything, but sure looked like him. I said, "Tom?" And sure enough, it was. Tom had been on the Today Show that morning. And I, of course, was speaking at the Hayden Planetarium. Neither one of us knew we were the other guy was in New York. I just thought of all the places in the world, we're both in New York at the same time. And of all the places one can be in New York, we both happened to be at this toy store at one time. And so that was kind of humorous. And we were later we got in a cab to drive down to Penn Station. We were going to ride a train down to DC, and I rode up shotgun with a cab driver, and I asked him if he'd ever met anybody famous, and he said, well, he mentioned something like that, and I said, well, you don't believe what just happened to me. I was in the Schwartz. You know who I saw? I saw Tom Bopp, Comet Hale-Bopp. He was right there in front of me, and I got to talk to him and everything. And I was actually so excited. Of course, I didn't bother to tell him who I was. And my wife was in the back seat. She was about ready to go ballistic because I wouldn't tell the guy. But anyway,
that's interesting. This would have been what, around 96, 97?
This is 97. This is like April of 97.
Okay.
This was right when the comet was bright and everything. I mean,
interesting.
I mean, I had people come up tell me, "Oh, your comet was so great. We had such good views of it." And I tell them, more than likely they had better views of it than I did, because while it was bright, I had to be famous guy and go to all the talks and go to all the big cities and the light polluted cities and everything. I didn't get to see it as much as I want. Although I deliberately made sure that I stayed here during the period of time right around perihelion when it was brightest. I wanted to be here. But the rest of the time, I was traveling all over. This is that Riverside meeting in 2018. David Levy, Gene Mueller, Don Machholz, and me. Everybody, I mean, I don't know. Vicky, my wife, took this picture, but so many people took that same picture of all of us. That probably the most repeated picture from that gathering. I mentioned Lawrence Doyle and Kepler 16. That's the front page of the paper we wrote and published, and then the graphic of Kepler 16. Recovery images of Olbers for anyone who hasn't seen it. Let me go. You see the moving object?
Mm-hmm.
That's Olbers 22nd magnitude. That was a recovery. I had been trying to recover this for some time. and I had a false alarm one time, so I was really careful about. I didn't want to report any more false alarms, so I was looking along. I had centered the image according on the Minor Planet Center's prediction, but when I was examining the images, I was looking along the line of variation, and I found this object about minus 18 hours from the general prediction. So, of course, immediately I ordered up a new set of images. The nice thing about LCO, there's different telescopes at different sites. So if it's one artifact, presumably you're not going to have an artifact in the exact same position with another telescope at another site. But meanwhile, I had taken another attempt about a week and a half earlier. Now that I knew where to look, I went and looked at those images, and I found Olbers on those older images, very faint. No wonder I didn't see them at the time. And that says, okay, maybe I've really got something. And then when I started getting new images back, and it was consistent with these, and then I reported it to you, Dan. Shuichikano did a orbit calculation with my observations, and then I did new images based on his orbit, and it's right there where it's supposed to be. That's when I said, okay, I think I've got this. So I was really pleased, because I've been trying for about a year to get this recovery of Olbers, and there it was. And this is just DSLR on tripod image of Olbers that I took last summer. Right there. Not much, but it's there. About 6 magnitude. And I'm still imaging it. This was about a month ago. It's near opposition right now, and it's 3 degrees from the galactic center, Sagittarius. So it's
not too many other people observing it, probably.
Yeah. I mean, that comet's kind of special to me. The last appearance in 1956 was 2 years before I was born. In fact, Vicky, my wife, her parents were married shortly after the final appearance, the final observations of that comet were made in 1956. So I had that personal connection, and of course, being able to make that recovery. That's a very special comet to me. So we'll probably try to image it a couple more times, although it's pretty dim now. I mean, everything. That's Comet Suchinshan Atlas from that resort facility in Las Cruces that I was attending. There was some light pollution. It wasn't bad. We also had bright moonlight, so the light pollution was kind of moot, to be all honest with you. But this is one of the photographs I took from there. And this is my background picture that I was telling you about. And this is the one that was taken by my friend, the state senator. That's me in the wheelchair. They're in front pointing it out, or maybe I'm blocking one of the lights. I don't know. But, yeah. And this is Comet Atlas 2024 S1, the great sun grazer image that I ordered up from my hospital bed in intensive care. So even though I'm laid up and can't do much, I could at least do something. So I was able to at least observe the comet in some way, even if I never was able to observe it visually. And that's just a photograph I took a couple of nights ago of the nova in Lupus. Yeah. You can see. And Casper, that's your comet right there.
Oh, that's a
couple of nights ago.
looking the best one I've seen so far, probably. The best image.
This is just a couple of nights ago. It's looking healthy.
Magnitude 15.
What's that?
Probably.
What
Probably
telescope?
around magnitude 15, right? Roughly.
It's I would say maybe just looking at that about 16 right now. I mean, that's what the software measured. If it continues to brighten, but in about 2 months, it would be probably bright enough to attempt visually, and I will roll my telescope out for your comet. As I said, I don't do that much anymore. It's really hard on my body to do that. My knees complain, my back complains, but I will do it for your comet. Believe me.
It would be an honor if you get to observe my comet, because your comet is the reason why I got into comets and found this comet. So, it would be a full circle moment if you get to see it.
Yeah. Well, yours is the one now, of course. As you are undoubtedly well aware, when it's near perihelion next January, it's going to be strictly in the southern hemisphere. You planning on heading south for it, or?
Yes, I'm planning on traveling to Chile. Yep.
Okay. And then it does come back north afterwards, and we'll see what it does. But no, by all means, you get that opportunity to do it. That's Another one of the recent discoveries, this is 2025 K1, that has a small perihelion distance, but I think we're also whether or not this thing actually survives is another question. But this is just a couple of nights ago. That's what it's looking like now. It has brightened quite a bit since its discovery last month, but it's still got a ways to go. And just to show that I'm another thing, this is 2025 MH, the Damocloid object that was discovered almost exactly completely retrograde orbit, but inclination is about 175. I do take a lot of LCO images to see, again, as I mentioned, whether or not an object is cometary. This one looks totally stellar. Even though it's definitely a cometary orbit, it's definitely stellar, at least as of now. Perihelion's about a month from now, so we'll see what that does. This is Gault. You might remember this is the main belt asteroid that had that tail about 5 or 6 years ago. And one of the images I took of Gault showed its tail. One of the more interesting comets I've imaged with LCO and actually managed to observe visually a couple times. This is 2I Borisov, the interstellar comet that we had in 2019. It got just bright enough, magnitude 14.5. I did get it visually on 2 mornings, but it was right at the very limit. So,
you mean visually?
Visually, I saw that visually.
Okay.
Yeah, I got numerous images over about a span of about 4 months. But this was a couple of weeks after perihelion and right at the time it was closest to Earth. And so this was the brightest it was going to. We had exceptionally good weather for a couple of days, a couple of nights. So even though it was middle of winter, it was December. Vicky, ever the good sport here, actually shoveled snow off our observing slab for me. She's sitting right over here, by the way, so she's hearing all this. She laughed when she heard me say that. So I was able to go out and I got it visually on 2 mornings, but it's right at the extreme limit. But it was there. I followed it for a couple of hours on both mornings, and detected motion, and it was there. This is my. I mentioned I made the recovery of Weigert stars, 351P. There it is here, and there it is there. So these observations have not been reported on by the MPC yet, but that, as far as I know, that's the recovery of that particular comet.
Don't you feel a little like Clyde Tombaugh when you're looking at blinking images like this?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, yeah. He likes, when he gives public talks, he would always put the discovery images side by side. He says, "Okay, do you see it?"
Yeah. Yep.
This is a couple more pictures. This is taken at our wedding a year ago. So that's Vicky and me, my 2 sons, who are now both in their 30s, with families of their own. So this, you can see what it looks like out here where I live, by the way. This was right here in our yard.
A lot of pine trees.
Yep. And Vicky was very nice. She actually let me wear shorts for our wedding. So and my 2 sons, who both still consider me their dad, were my 2 best men, and but now I've got the 3 grandkids, and my youngest one, Santiago, was just born. He was just born last year, and say he will be older than I am now when Mike's comet comes around. So, these 2 pictures. I did an online observing or online educational program 5 years ago, Ice and Stone 2020, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of my first comet observation and the 25th anniversary of the Hale-Bopp discovery. And to illustrate the motion of main belt asteroids, I took 2 images of asteroid 4151 for obvious reasons. I showed the pictures to Vicky without any arrows. Said, "Can you spot the asteroid, the moving asteroid?" She couldn't find it, but she found another asteroid within those 2 same images. 4151 Alan Hale is the blue arrows. the one that she found are the yellow arrows. Well, I did some checking. It was a linear discovery from about 2000, which had been numbered, but had never been named. I contacted Grant Stokes, who's the PI of the linear program. Says, well, after 10 years after numbering, anyone can suggest a name. So I thought, well, Vicky kind of rediscovered this asteroid. So I contacted Gareth Williams and asked if we could have this asteroid named after her. The Small Bodies Name Committee was going through some reorganization at the time. It was a couple of years, but then Gareth wrote me back at that point and says, yeah, it looks good. So that's asteroid, I think it's 75581 Stone Mose. Vicky's maiden name was Stone. Her previous marriage was Mosley. So that's Stone Mose. So Vicky and I were together for a few hours in space at one point in time about 6 years ago. So those are our two asteroids.
That's a good story. Do you have this framed on your wall somewhere?
No, but that might not be a bad idea. I show that picture everywhere. I give lots of talks. Here's another example. Do you see the moving asteroid in this picture? Whoops.
Yep.
Okay. Following that, I asked Gareth, I said, I've got a few other names that I kind of like to suggest for asteroids. He said, well, send them to me. We'll see what the Small Bodies Names Committee says. So I sent him a list of names and wrote citations. The committee actually accepted two of my names that I suggested, including for this particular asteroid. There's the citation right there. I was very pleased that they accepted this one. I contacted the Johnny Cash Museum in Nashville. Asked them if I told them about the story. Were they interested? They said yes. So I sent them those two images and I sent them this citation. I don't know what they did with it, but they have it. So Johnny Cash, whom I've been a fan of Johnny Cash since I was old enough to know that there was something called music. And so I was pleased that I was able to have an asteroid named for him. And I got to see him in concert once when I was living in California in the early 80s. So I always treasure that moment. So yeah, that was cool. What other asteroid that I didn't have any part in naming? I did have an episode in naming an asteroid, but there was an entry discussion with Brian, and there's this rule that asteroids are not named for political figures unless that person has been dead for 100 years or more. And I think we all understand the reasons for that. But what about someone who will become a political figure later, but this was before that happened? As you know, Linear names a lot of their asteroids after science fair winners. Students who do well in science fair and their mentors. Well, turns out there was a certain student who in 2007 at the International Science Fair that was actually held here in Albuquerque won second prize in a project for microbiology. That's her. That is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as a 17-year-old high school student. And Linear named an asteroid after her. It's 23238. I took an image of her asteroid, contacted her office. I asked them, would you like it? Oh, yes. So I sent this picture to them, and I think I sent the citation to them as well. So anyway.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very interesting. And I sit on the names committee.
Well, I think this was back where you were there back in 2007, right?
I was not. Is that when it was named? 2007?
Yes.
Okay. I was not. I was on the committee for comets only in 2007. I took when Brian Marsden passed away in 2010, I moved in to fill his slot on the committee for naming minor planets as well.
Yeah. But of course, in 2007, she was just a high school student who had won a prize at the International Science Fair.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of the other prize winners that have their names on asteroids of the Linear program. So,
do you know the name off the top of your head
of that asteroid?
Yeah.
I think it's 23238 Ocasio-Cortez.
Oh, okay. With a hyphen?
Yes.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, she could not have it named for her now.
No, she couldn't, but this was before.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Very interesting story.
yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. That was a very interesting interview, interesting images. And we're really glad that we were able to interview you today.
Yeah.
Can,
It was my
can
pleasure. I had a lot of fun here. Yeah.
can I just say something, Dan?
Yep.
What a wonderful interview, Alan. I think that of all your skills and attributes, one of your main attributes is your wonderful memory. You've got so many wonderful stories and you remember all the dates and events. It's terrific. All the best for the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Can I tell one more story?
Sure.
Yeah. There was a question about have you ever seen anything strange? And of course, and I get a lot of UFO type people always ask, well, you ever seen any UFOs or anything like that, or anything you can't explain? And I said, well, no. I mean, I've looked at the sky a lot, and I've seen a lot of strange phenomena. I mean, I've seen satellite reentries. I saw things like that fuel dump. I've seen, here where aurora is a rather rare phenomenon. People have actually seen an aurora display and thought they were seeing UFOs, like that. But then I tell this one story. The only time I see something that I really don't have a explanation right at hand for, and I'm not even sure this is a real memory. I was this because it was so long ago. I couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, and we were driving home one night, and again, we kind of lived out in the outskirts of town. And I remember looking over into the horizon towards I guess, the southwest, and there were these 4 brilliant arcs, kind of crescent shape, maybe 5 degrees above the horizon. Brilliant orange arcs. That's all I really remember of that. But that's certainly the type of thing that somebody might have considered a UFO because they were above ground, they were in the sky, and that's just not something you normally see every day. And so I don't really have an immediate explanation for what I might have seen. However, there is one detail that I have not shared yet that does point to what the likely explanation is that assuming that is a correct memory, and assuming that I was where I think I was at the time, and I was looking in the right direction, I would have been looking in the direction of Holloman Air Force Base and White Sands Missile Range. And I think we can probably gather that it was almost certainly something going on at the missile range, because there's always crazy stuff going on at White Sands. So that's what I think that was. But there's no way I'd say, if assuming it's even a real memory, it would have been 1967, 1968, somewhere in that time frame. I don't remember that date, unfortunately. But that's another one of my strange things stories.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Alan. And all the best. And
thank you.
We will try to get this posted fairly quickly.
Okay.
To our ICQ Comets and Their Cousins YouTube channel.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
Okay.